The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the hallway of City General Hospital as morning shift began. Nurse Linda walked through the familiar corridors, her soft-soled shoes making quiet sounds on the polished floor. She had been working at this hospital for 15 long years, and she thought she had seen everything. Broken bones, heart attacks, difficult surgeries, angry families, scared children. Nothing really surprised her anymore. But that Tuesday morning was different. Something was happening in room 314 that made even the toughest nurses uncomfortable. Word had spread quickly through the hospital grapevine about the new patient who had arrived late the night before. The man had been transferred from his third hospital in just 2 months, and nobody seemed to want him. Linda first noticed something was wrong during the morning handoff meeting. The night shift nurse, Patricia, was explaining patient assignments to the day staff. When she got to room 314, Patricia's voice became quiet and strained. The patient in 314, well, Patricia paused, looking around the room. He's been through a lot. Severe burn injuries covering most of his body. The other hospital said he was difficult to work with. Linda watched as the other nurses shifted in their seats. Some looked down at their clipboards. Others suddenly found their coffee cups very interesting. It was clear that nobody wanted this assignment. "I'll take extra patients today," said Janet, one of the senior nurses. "My schedule is pretty light. Actually, I think I need to reorganize my whole section," added Robert from across the room. "Maybe someone else should handle 314. Linda had seen this before. She had worked in hospitals long enough to recognize when staff were making excuses. As one of only 3 black nurses on the day shift, she knew what it felt like when people found reasons to avoid you. The familiar feeling sat heavy in her stomach. After the meeting, Linda walked to the break room where small groups of nurses were talking in low voices. She poured herself coffee and listened to the conversations around her. "I heard he looks really bad," whispered one nurse. "Like really bad. The night nurses said they could barely look at him. Why do we have to take patients that other hospitals don't want?" complained another. "We're not a charity." "I feel sorry for whoever gets assigned to him," said a third nurse, shaking her head. "I heard he doesn't talk much and just stares at people. It's creepy." Linda felt her jaw tighten. She had heard enough. Without saying a word, she walked out of the break room and headed straight to the charge nurse station. "I'll take room 314, she told Donna, the charge nurse. Donna looked up from her computer with surprise. "Are you sure, Linda? We can try to split his care among several nurses if you want." "No need," Linda replied firmly. "I've got this." Donna studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but let me know if you need any help." Linda walked down the hall toward room 314, her mind racing. She had made this decision quickly, driven by her frustration with her colleagues' behavior. But now, as she got closer to the room, she wondered what she would find. She stopped outside the door and took a deep breath. Through the small window she could see a figure lying in the hospital bed. The room was dim, with the curtains mostly closed. Linda knocked gently and pushed the door open. "Good morning," she said in her most professional voice. "I'm Linda, and I'll be your nurse today." The man in the bed turned his head slightly toward her. What Linda saw made her heart skip a beat, but she kept her expression calm. The patient's face and visible skin were covered in thick, twisted scars from severe burns. His features were distorted, and several fingers on his left hand were missing. It was clear that he had been through something terrible, but what struck Linda most was not his appearance, it was the look in his eyes. They held a mixture of sadness, shame, and resignation that she recognized all too well. This was a person who had learned to expect rejection. "Hello?" the patient said quietly, his voice raspy and barely above a whisper. He quickly looked away from her face as if he was used to people being uncomfortable around him. Linda walked over to his bedside with confident steps. "What's your name?" she asked, pulling up a chair. "Thomas," he replied, still not meeting her eyes. "Well, Thomas, I'm going to be taking care of you during the day shift. Is there anything you need right now? Are you in pain?" Thomas seemed surprised by her direct, matter-of-fact approach. Most people either treated him with exaggerated pity or barely concealed disgust. Linda was doing neither. I'm okay, he said uncertainly. Linda began her routine patient assessment, checking his vital signs and examining his wounds. She worked efficiently but gently, explaining what she was doing at each step. Thomas remained tense at first, clearly expecting some kind of negative reaction. As Linda worked, she noticed things that the other nurses had missed in their hurry to avoid him. Thomas was actually very clean and well-groomed despite his injuries. His remaining fingernails were neatly trimmed. His hair, though thin in places due to scarring, was recently washed. This was not a man who had given up on himself entirely. "How long have you been dealing with these injuries?" Linda asked as she changed his bandages. "About 10 years, Thomas replied, his voice growing slightly stronger. Linda nodded without showing any shock or pity. "That's a long time. You must have learned a lot about managing your care." Thomas looked at her with surprise. Most medical staff talked about his injuries as if he wasn't in the room, or asked probing questions about how he had been burned. Linda was treating him like a partner in his own health care. "I try to take care of myself," he said. "I can tell," Linda replied. "Your skin care routine is clearly working. Some of these older scars look really well maintained." For the first time, Thomas made direct eye contact with her. There was something like gratitude in his expression. As Linda continued her work, she began to see past the scars to the person underneath. Thomas was probably in his late 60s with intelligent eyes and a gentle manner. When he spoke, his voice carried the tone of someone who was educated and thoughtful. "The other hospitals," Thomas said suddenly, "the nurses there, they, what?" Linda asked, not stopping her work. "They were afraid of me," he finished quietly. "They thought I was some kind of monster." Linda paused in her bandage changing and looked directly at Thomas. "Well, I don't scare easily," she said with a small smile, "and I don't see any monsters in this room." Thomas stared at her in amazement. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him with such simple kindness and respect. "Why are you being so nice to me?" he asked. Linda considered the question seriously. "Because you're my patient and you deserve good care. Because you're a human being who needs help, and because—" She paused, thinking about her own experiences with prejudice. "Because I know what it's like when people judge you before they know you." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you." As Linda finished her morning care routine, she noticed that Thomas seemed more relaxed. His shoulders weren't as tense and he was making more eye contact. "I'll be back to check on you in a couple of hours," Linda told him as she prepared to leave. "Is there anything special you need? Books? Magazines? Music?" "You would do that?" Thomas asked with surprise. "Of course. What do you like to read?" "History books mostly, and poetry sometimes." Linda smiled. "I'll see what I can find in our library." As she left room 314, Linda felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time at work. A sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The other nurses watched her come out of the room, clearly expecting her to complain or ask for reassignment. Instead, Linda walked confidently to the nurses' station and began charting Thomas's care with the same attention she gave all her patients. "How was it?" asked Janet curiously. "Fine," Linda replied, simply. "He's a nice man who needs medical care just like everyone else." Linda didn't elaborate, but she had already decided something important. Thomas would receive the best care she could provide, regardless of what anyone else thought. She had seen something in his eyes that told her there was much more to his story than anyone knew, and she was determined to find out what that story was. Over the next few days, Linda began to understand why other nurses found Thomas difficult. But it wasn't for the reasons they thought. Thomas wasn't mean or rude, he was broken inside. He spoke only when asked direct questions, and even then, his answers were short and quiet. He never asked for anything, never complained about pain, and seemed to shrink into himself whenever anyone entered his room. Linda noticed that Thomas would turn his face away whenever she walked in, as if he was trying to hide from her sight. His meals often sat untouched on the bedside table. When she asked if the food was okay, he would just nod and say it was fine. but she could see he barely ate anything. On her third day caring for Thomas, Linda decided to try a different approach. Instead of rushing through his care like she did with other patients, she pulled up the chair next to his bed and sat down. "Thomas," she said gently, "can I ask you something?" He looked at her with surprise. Most nurses did their work and left quickly. "Okay," he whispered. "How long has it been since someone just sat and talked with you? Not about medical stuff, just regular conversation." Thomas was quiet for such a long time that Linda thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I don't remember." Linda felt her heart break a little. "Well, I have a few minutes before my next patient. Do you mind if I just sit here with you?" Thomas stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You want to sit with me?" "Sure. Unless you'd rather be alone." "No," Thomas said quickly, then seemed embarrassed by how eager he sounded. "I mean, if you want to." Linda settled back in her chair. "Tell me something about yourself, Thomas. What did you do before you came to the hospital?" "I don't really go out much," Thomas said carefully. "I mostly stay home." "What do you do at home? Do you have hobbies?" Thomas hesitated. "I read a lot, and I watch the news." "What kind of books do you like?" For the first time, Thomas's voice became slightly stronger. "History books mostly, about wars and heroes." He paused. "People who did brave things." Linda noticed how his voice changed when he talked about heroes. There was something wistful in his tone, like he was remembering something important. "That sounds interesting. Do you have a favorite time period?" "I like reading about firefighters," Thomas said, then immediately looked embarrassed as if he had revealed too much. "Firefighters are definitely heroes," Linda agreed. "Have you always been interested in that?" Thomas nodded but didn't elaborate. Linda could sense there was more to the story, but she didn't push. Instead, she talked about her own life. Her 2 teenage kids, her husband who worked at the post office, her evening classes where she was studying to become a nurse practitioner. "You're going back to school?" Thomas asked, showing genuine interest. "For the first time." 3 nights a week, Linda said. "It's hard work, but I want to be able to help people in bigger ways." "That's really good," Thomas said, and Linda could hear respect in his voice. "Education is important. Not everyone gets the chance." Linda was surprised by the insight in his comment. This wasn't the simple response she might expect from someone who had been isolated for years. Thomas clearly understood the value of opportunity and hard work. As the days passed, Linda made it a point to spend at least 10 minutes just talking with Thomas during each shift. Slowly, he began to open up. She learned that he lived alone in a small apartment across town. His groceries were delivered, and he rarely left his home except for medical appointments. "Don't you get lonely?" Linda asked one afternoon. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You get used to it," he said. "It's easier than dealing with how people look at you." "How do people look at you?" "Like I'm a monster," Thomas said simply. "Like I might be contagious or dangerous. Children cry when they see me. Adults stare and then look away real quick like they're embarrassed." Linda felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "That must be really hard." "I understand it," Thomas said. "I look scary. I know that. It's not their fault." "It's not your fault either," Linda replied firmly. Thomas looked at her with surprise. "What do you mean?" "Whatever happened to you, whatever caused your injuries, it wasn't your fault. And you shouldn't have to hide from the world because some people don't know how to act decent." Thomas stared at her for a long moment. "You really believe that?" "I know it," Linda said. "You're one of the kindest, most polite patients I've ever had. You never complain. You always say please and thank you, and you ask about my family like you actually care. Those are the things that matter about a person." Linda watched as Thomas's eyes filled with tears. He quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Don't apologize for having feelings," Linda said gently. When was the last time someone told you that you were a good person? Thomas thought about it. I honestly can't remember. That evening, Linda went home with Thomas on her mind. She told her husband David about her patient over dinner. He's just so isolated, she explained. He's clearly intelligent and well-educated, but he's been hiding from the world for years. It's like he's given up on himself. Sounds like he's lucky to have you as his nurse, David said. I don't know if I'm helping enough, Linda replied. He needs more than just medical care. He needs to remember that he's still a person worth knowing. The next day, Linda brought something special to work. She had stopped by the hospital library and checked out 3 books about firefighter history. When she walked into Thomas's room, she set the books on his bedside table. I thought you might like these, she said. Thomas stared at the books like they were treasure. You got these for me? The librarian said they're really good. Lots of stories about brave people doing heroic things. Thomas picked up one of the books with his scarred hands and held it carefully. Thank you, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. Nobody has brought me anything in so long. Well, I figured you'd be here for at least another week, so you might as well have something good to read. As Linda went about her morning routine, she noticed that Thomas kept glancing at the books. When she came back to check on him an hour later, he was reading intently. Good book? She asked. Really good, Thomas said. And for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled. It was a small smile, partly hidden by his scars, but it was genuine. This chapter is about a fire captain who saved a whole family from a burning building, Thomas continued. He risked everything to get them out. What happened to him? He made it out, but just barely. The building collapsed right after he got the last person to safety. Thomas's voice was full of admiration. He spent months in the hospital, but he said it was worth it because everyone lived. Linda noticed how Thomas's whole demeanor changed when he talked about heroic rescues. His voice became stronger, his posture straighter. It was like he was remembering something important about himself. You really admire firefighters, don't you? She observed. They're the real heroes, Thomas said quietly. They run toward danger when everyone else runs away. They put other people's lives before their own safety. That takes a special kind of person, Linda agreed. Yes, Thomas said, staring out the window. A very special kind of person. Linda sensed there was more to Thomas's fascination with firefighters than simple admiration, but she didn't press. Instead, she was just happy to see him engaged and animated about something. This was the most alive she had seen him since he arrived. As she prepared to leave his room, Thomas called out to her. Linda? Yes? Thank you. Not just for the books, but for treating me like I matter. Linda walked back to his bedside and looked him directly in the eyes. You do matter, Thomas. Don't ever forget that. As she left room 314 that day, Linda knew something important was happening. Thomas was beginning to remember who he was underneath all those scars. And she had a feeling there was much more to his story than anyone realized. 3 weeks had passed since Thomas arrived at the hospital, and Linda had noticed a remarkable change in him. He was eating better, talking more, and even making jokes occasionally. The other nurses had started to see him differently too, partly because Linda never spoke badly about him, and partly because they could see he wasn't the difficult patient they had imagined. But Linda sensed that Thomas was still hiding something big. Sometimes she would catch him staring out the window with a look of deep sadness, as if he was remembering something painful. Other times, when they talked about current events or local news, he would make comments that showed he knew a lot more about the city and its people than someone who supposedly never left his apartment. On a Thursday morning, Linda was helping Thomas with his physical therapy exercises. The doctor had said he needed to move around more to prevent his muscles from getting weaker. As Linda guided his arm through gentle stretches, she noticed something she had never seen before. On Thomas's left forearm, partially hidden by scar tissue, was a small tattoo. It was faded and distorted by the burn damage, but Linda could make out what looked like numbers. Thomas, she said carefully, what's that tattoo on your arm? Thomas immediately pulled his arm away, and covered the tattoo with his other hand. His whole body tensed up and the relaxed expression he had been wearing disappeared. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "Just some old numbers." But Linda had worked with enough patience to know when someone was hiding something important. "Thomas, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'm curious. Those numbers look like they might mean something special." Thomas was quiet, for a long time staring down at his hands. Linda could see he was struggling with some kind of internal battle. "You won't believe me if I tell you," he finally said. "Try me," Linda replied gently. Thomas took a deep breath and slowly uncovered his arm. The tattoo was small and simple, just 4 numbers. 3847. "It was my badge number," Thomas said so quietly that Linda had to lean in to hear him. "Your badge number?" Linda repeated, not understanding. "I was a firefighter," Thomas said, then quickly added, "a long time ago. Before this happened to me." Linda stared at him in shock. Of all the things she might have expected, this wasn't one of them. "You were a firefighter?" "For 30 years, Thomas nodded, still not looking at her. "I was a captain when I had to retire." Suddenly everything made sense to Linda. Thomas's fascination with firefighter stories, his knowledge about the city, his comments about heroes and bravery. It all fit together now. "Thomas," Linda said slowly, "how did you get injured?" Thomas's hands began to shake slightly. He had never told anyone the full story, not even the doctors who had treated him over the years, but something about Linda's kind eyes and patient manner made him want to finally share the truth. "There was a fire," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "An apartment building on Maple Street. It was late at night, around 2 in the morning. The building was old and the fire spread fast." Linda sat down in the chair next to his bed, sensing that this was going to be a long and important story. "When we got there, the whole first floor was already burning," Thomas continued, "but we could hear people screaming from the upper floors. There was a family trapped on the 3rd floor, a mother, father, and 3 kids." Thomas paused, lost in the memory. Linda waited patiently, not wanting to interrupt. "The stairwell was completely blocked by fire," Thomas went on. "There was no way to get a ladder truck close enough because of how the building was positioned. My captain said we should wait for more equipment, but I could hear those kids crying." Thomas's voice broke slightly. Linda reached over and gently touched his hand. "You went in anyway, didn't you?" she said softly. Thomas nodded. "I couldn't just stand there and listen to those children scream, so I found another way in through a back window. It took me 3 trips to get them all out. First the 2 youngest kids, then the oldest child, then the parents." "You saved all of them?" "Yes," Thomas said, and for a moment there was pride in his voice. "All 5 of them made it out safely, but when I was coming out with the father, the ceiling collapsed. A burning beam fell right on top of me and I got trapped under it." Linda felt tears forming in her eyes as she imagined the scene. "My team got me out, but by then..." Thomas gestured to his scarred body. "The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. I spent almost a year in the hospital and rehab. Burns over 70% of my body." "Oh, Thomas," Linda said, her voice full of emotion. "You're a hero." Thomas shook his head quickly. "No, I'm not. I'm just a monster now. That family I saved, they came to see me once in the hospital. They thanked me and cried and said they'd never forget me. But then they left and I never saw them again." "Thomas, that doesn't make you any less of a hero." "Look at me," Thomas said, his voice full of pain. "I used to be someone people respected. Other firefighters looked up to me. I was strong and capable and normal. Now I'm just this scary-looking thing that makes children cry." Linda stood up from her chair and moved closer to Thomas's bed. "Listen to me very carefully," she said firmly. "What you did, saving that family, that was one of the bravest things I've ever heard. The fact that you got hurt doing it doesn't make you less of a hero. It makes you more of one." Thomas looked at her with disbelief. "But look at me now. I can't even leave my apartment without frightening people." "Your appearance changed, Thomas, but your heart didn't. You're still the same brave person who ran into that burning building. You're still the same man who cared more about saving lives than protecting himself. But I'm useless now, Thomas protested. I can't save anyone anymore. I can't even take care of myself properly. Linda sat back down and looked Thomas directly in the eyes. Can I tell you something? In the 3 weeks I've been taking care of you, you've shown me more kindness and consideration than most people do. You ask about my family. You worry about whether I'm working too hard. You always say please and thank you. You encourage me to keep studying even though you barely know me. Thomas listened quietly, not used to hearing positive things about himself. And another thing, Linda continued. Do you realize that you're the reason I've started treating all my patients differently? Watching how brave you are every day, dealing with pain and loneliness but never complaining, that's taught me something about real strength. Really? Thomas asked, sounding surprised. Really? You may not be fighting fires anymore, but you're still making a difference in people's lives. You just don't realize it. Thomas was quiet for several minutes, processing what Linda had told him. Finally, he asked, do you really think those people I saved remember me? Thomas, how could they forget? You gave them their lives back. You gave those children the chance to grow up, to go to school, to have families of their own someday. That family is living their lives right now because of what you did. I just wish. Thomas started, then stopped. What do you wish? I wish I could know that it was worth it. That they're happy and doing well. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just stayed outside and waited for backup. Linda shook her head firmly. Don't you dare think that. If you had waited, that family would have died. 5 people are alive today because you were brave enough to act. But the cost was high, Linda agreed. But Thomas, some things are worth any cost. And saving 5 lives, including 3 children, is definitely worth it. For the first time since he had started telling his story, Thomas looked directly at Linda. You really believe that? I know it, Linda said without hesitation. And I think deep down you know it too. Thomas nodded slowly. I used to know it, before I got so caught up in feeling sorry for myself. It's okay to feel sorry for yourself. Sometimes, Linda said gently. You've been through something terrible. But don't let that pain make you forget who you really are. As Linda prepared to leave for her lunch break, Thomas called out to her one more time. Linda? Yes? Thank you for listening. I haven't told that story to anyone in 10 years. Thank you for trusting me with it, Linda replied. And Thomas, I'm proud to know you. As Linda walked out of room 314, her mind was racing. She had always known Thomas was special, but now she understood just how special he really was. This man wasn't just a patient. He was a genuine hero who had sacrificed everything to save others, and Linda was determined to help him remember that. After learning about Thomas's heroic past, Linda found herself thinking about him even when she wasn't at work. She kept imagining him as a strong, confident fire captain, leading his team and saving lives. It was hard to picture, but she could see glimpses of that man in the way Thomas carried himself when he thought no one was watching. The next few days brought more revelations. Thomas seemed relieved to finally have someone who knew his story, and he began sharing more details about his life before the accident. Linda learned that he had joined the fire department when he was just 22 years old, fresh out of training and eager to help people. I loved that job more than anything, Thomas told her one afternoon. Every day was different. Sometimes we fought fires, sometimes we rescued people from car accidents, sometimes we just helped get cats out of trees. He smiled at the memory. But it all mattered. Every call mattered to someone. Did you ever think about doing anything else? Linda asked. Never, Thomas replied without hesitation. From the first day I put on that uniform, I knew I had found my purpose. I was good at it too. I wasn't the biggest or the strongest guy on the team, but I was smart about strategy and I never gave up. Linda could hear the pride in his voice, and it made her happy to see him remembering better times. Tell me about the other firefighters you worked with, she said. Thomas's eyes lit up. They were like my family. Rodriguez was my lieutenant for years before I got promoted. Danny was the rookie who always asked a million questions. Captain Wilson taught me everything I knew about leadership. His expression grew sad. I wonder what they think of me now. What do you mean? I just disappeared after I got out of the hospital, Thomas explained. I was so ashamed of how I looked I didn't want them to see me. I never went to any of the retirement parties or department events. They probably think I'm ungrateful, or that I don't care about them anymore. Linda felt a stab of sadness for Thomas. He had cut himself off from the people who had been his closest friends and colleagues. Have you thought about reaching out to them? She asked gently. Thomas shook his head. It's been too long, and besides, what would I say? Hi, remember me? I'm the guy who used to be your captain, but now I look like a monster? Thomas. I bet they miss you more than you realize, Linda said. Real friends don't stop caring about you because of how you look. Thomas seemed to consider this, but Linda could tell he wasn't convinced. As the conversation continued, Linda learned more surprising things about Thomas's life. Despite living as a recluse for 10 years, he hadn't been completely inactive. He told her about his small apartment, which was filled with books, newspapers, and magazines. I try to keep up with what's happening in the world, he explained, especially local news. Old habits, I guess. When you're a firefighter, you need to know what's going on in your community. Do you still follow news about the fire department? Linda asked. Every day, Thomas admitted. I read every article about fires, rescues, department promotions. I know the names of all the new captains and chiefs. He paused. I even know about some of the younger firefighters who've won awards for bravery. Linda was amazed by how connected Thomas still felt to his old profession, even after all these years of isolation. But the biggest surprise came when Thomas started talking about his finances. Linda had assumed that he was struggling financially, living alone on disability payments. She was shocked to learn the truth. I don't need much money for myself, Thomas said when Linda mentioned the hospital's financial counseling services. I live pretty simply. My apartment is small. I don't go out to eat. I don't travel. Most of my pension and disability money just sits in the bank. That's good that you're able to save, Linda replied. Thomas looked uncomfortable, as if he was debating whether to tell her something. Finally, he spoke up. Actually, I don't save it. I use it for something else. What do you mean? Thomas took a deep breath. About 8 years ago, I started a scholarship program for kids who want to become firefighters or paramedics but can't afford the training. Linda stared at him in amazement. You started a scholarship program? Through my lawyer, Thomas explained. Quickly. Nobody knows it's me. The kids just think it's from some anonymous donor. But I've helped 12 young people so far. 3 of them are firefighters now, 2 are paramedics, and the others are still in training. Linda felt like her heart might burst with pride and amazement. Thomas, that's incredible. You're still saving lives, just in a different way. I don't know about that, Thomas said modestly. I just read about these kids in the local newspaper. Kids who had good grades and wanted to help people but couldn't afford the academy fees. So I asked my lawyer to set up a fund. How do you choose who gets the scholarships? Thomas smiled, and Linda could see the joy this topic brought him. I look for kids who remind me of myself when I was young. Kids who really want to help people, not just kids who think being a firefighter looks exciting. I read their essays, and I can usually tell who has the right heart for the job. Do you ever meet them? Oh no, Thomas said quickly. They don't know who I am. But I follow their progress. I keep newspaper clippings when they graduate or when they do something good on the job. His voice grew proud. One of my scholarship kids, Kevin, just got promoted to lieutenant last month. Another one, Maria, saved a woman from a house fire last year. Linda was struggling to process what she was hearing. This man who thought of himself as useless and forgotten had been quietly funding the dreams of young people for years. Thomas, do you realize what an amazing thing you're doing? She said. You're creating a whole new generation of heroes. I just wish I could do more, Thomas replied. Sometimes I think about all the experience and knowledge I have and how I could teach these young firefighters, but He gestured to his scarred face. I can't exactly show up at the fire academy looking like this. Why not? Linda asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Because I'd scare them, Thomas said matter-of-factly. Or maybe you'd inspire them, Linda countered. Maybe they need to hear from someone who knows what it really means to sacrifice for others. Thomas looked at her with doubt. You think anyone would want to hear from me? I think you're underestimating people, Linda said. Yes, some people might be uncomfortable with your appearance at first, but once they heard your story, once they understood who you really are, I think they'd be honored to learn from you, Thomas. Was quiet for a long time, clearly thinking about what Linda had said. Can I ask you something? Linda continued. Why did you decide to help those kids with scholarships instead of keeping the money for yourself? Thomas considered the question seriously. Because I remembered what it felt like to be young and want to help people but not know how to make it happen. I was lucky, my family supported me, and the fire department training didn't cost as much back then. But these kids today, they face so many barriers. So you decided to remove some of those barriers? I guess so, Thomas said. I figured if I couldn't save people directly anymore, maybe I could help train the people who would. Linda felt tears forming in her eyes. Thomas, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Really? Really. You took your pain and your isolation, and instead of becoming bitter, you found a way to keep giving back. You're still the same hero you always were. Thomas looked down at his hands. I never thought about it that way. Well, start thinking about it that way, Linda said firmly. Because it's the truth. As Linda prepared to leave that day, she had an idea forming in her mind. Thomas had been hiding his light under a bushel for far too long. Maybe it was time for the world to know about the real Thomas, not just the burn victim, but the hero, who had never stopped serving others. Thomas, she said before leaving, would you mind if I made some phone calls? What kind of phone calls? Just some people I think should know your story. Thomas looked nervous. I don't know, Linda. I'm not ready for people to... Trust me, Linda said gently. I think you'll be surprised by how people react when they learn the truth about who you really are. That evening, Linda went home with a mission. It was time for Thomas to step out of the shadows and reclaim his place as the hero he had always been. Linda went home that evening with her mind racing. She couldn't stop thinking about everything Thomas had told her. Here was a man who had sacrificed everything to save others, then spent years quietly helping young people achieve their dreams, all while believing he was worthless. It wasn't right, and Linda was determined to do something about it. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and started researching. She found old newspaper articles about the apartment fire that had changed Thomas's life forever. The headlines read, Hero Firefighter Saves Family of 5 and Captain Risks Life in Dramatic Rescue. There were photos of Thomas from before his injuries. A strong, confident man in his fire department uniform, receiving awards and shaking hands with the mayor. Linda also found more recent articles about some of the scholarship recipients Thomas had mentioned. Sure enough, there were stories about Kevin's promotion to lieutenant and Maria's heroic rescue. The articles mentioned that their training had been funded by an anonymous donor who wishes to support future first responders. The next morning, Linda arrived at work early and went straight to the hospital administrator's office. She had worked at the hospital long enough to have a good relationship with Mrs. Patterson, the head administrator. Linda, what can I do for you? Mrs. Patterson asked when Linda knocked on her door. I need to make some phone calls on behalf of one of my patients, Linda explained. It's important, and I think it could make a real difference in his recovery. Mrs. Patterson listened as Linda carefully explained Thomas's situation, leaving out specific details to protect his privacy, but emphasizing his heroic background and current need for reconnection with his community. Go ahead and make your calls, Mrs. Patterson said. Use my office if you need privacy. Linda's first call was to the city fire department. After being transferred several times, she finally reached Captain Rodriguez, the same Rodriguez that Thomas had mentioned as his former lieutenant. Captain Rodriguez, my name is Linda, and I'm a nurse at City General Hospital. I'm calling about one of your former colleagues, Captain Thomas Mitchell. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Thomas, is he okay? We haven't heard from him in years. He's in the hospital right now, but he's going to be fine, Linda explained. Captain Rodriguez, I think there are some things you should know about what Thomas has been doing since he retired. Linda spent the next 20 minutes telling Rodriguez about Thomas's scholarship program and his ongoing dedication to helping future firefighters. She could hear the amazement in Rodriguez's voice as he learned about his former captain's secret generosity. I can't believe he's been doing all this and never told anyone, Rodriguez said. Thomas was always like that, though. Never wanted credit for the good things he did. He thinks you and the other firefighters have forgotten about him, Linda said. He's ashamed of his appearance and believes he's not the same person you used to know. That's ridiculous, Rodriguez replied firmly. Thomas is a legend in this department. We talk about his rescue at the Maple Street fire all the time. It's used as an example in training sessions about courage and quick thinking. Would you be willing to visit him? Linda asked. Just try to stop me, Rodriguez said. In fact, I think I'll bring a few other guys from his old crew. And Linda, thank you for calling. We should have tried harder to stay in touch with him. Linda's next call was to the local newspaper. She spoke with a reporter named Janet, who covered community interest stories. Linda explained about Thomas's hidden scholarship program and his heroic background. This sounds like an amazing story, Janet said. Would your patient be willing to be interviewed? I'm not sure yet, Linda admitted, but I think he needs to understand how much good he's done and how much people still respect him. Let me do some research on this scholarship program, Janet said. If I can track down some of the recipients, maybe we can put together a story that shows him the impact he's made. Linda made several more calls that morning, to the fire department's public relations office, to a local TV station that often featured community heroes, and even to the mayor's office. Everyone she spoke with was amazed to learn about Thomas's story and eager to help. When Linda walked into Thomas's room that afternoon, she found him reading one of the firefighter books she had brought him. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. You look like you're up to something, he said with a small grin. Maybe I am, Linda replied. Thomas, how would you feel about having some visitors? Thomas's expression immediately became worried. What kind of visitors? The kind who've been missing you for 10 years. Before Thomas could respond, there was a knock on the door. Linda had timed this perfectly. Captain Rodriguez walked in, followed by two other firefighters in their dress uniforms. Thomas's eyes went wide with shock. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to hide under his blanket. But Rodriguez walked right up to his bedside with a huge smile. Captain Mitchell, Rodriguez said, standing at attention and giving Thomas a crisp salute. It's an honor to see you again, sir. The other two firefighters also saluted. Thomas stared at them in amazement, tears forming in his eyes. Rodriguez, Thomas said quietly, what are you doing here? Coming to see one of the finest firefighters who ever served this city, Rodriguez replied. And to thank you for something we just learned about. Thomas looked confused. Thank me for what? Your scholarship program, said Danny, one of the other firefighters. Captain, do you have any idea how many lives you've changed with that program? Thomas looked at Linda accusingly. You told them? I told them about a hero who never stopped serving his community, Linda said. They had a right to know. Rodriguez sat down in the chair next to Thomas's bed. Captain, why didn't you tell us what you were doing? We could have helped. We could have supported you. Because look at me, Thomas said, gesturing to his scars. I'm not the man you used to know. You're exactly the man we used to know, Rodriguez said firmly. The man who always put others first. The man who never gave up when people needed help. The man who taught us what it really means to be a firefighter. Danny stepped forward. Captain, one of your scholarship kids, Maria, works at my station now. She's one of the best firefighters I've ever seen, and she has no idea that her training was paid for by the same man whose rescue techniques we still study in the academy. Thomas stared at them in disbelief. You still talk about that rescue? Are you kidding? Rodriguez laughed. It's legendary. Every new recruit hears about Captain Mitchell and the Maple Street rescue. How you found a way into that building when everyone else said it was impossible. How you made 4 trips to save that whole family. It's the standard we hold everyone to, Danny added. When someone's facing a tough situation, we ask them, what would Captain Mitchell do? Thomas began crying openly now. Linda handed him tissues while the three firefighters continued sharing stories about how his legacy had lived on in the department. The visit lasted for over an hour. By the time the firefighters left, Thomas was sitting up straighter and had more life in his eyes than Linda had seen since she met him. I can't believe they remembered me, Thomas said after they left. Thomas, you're not someone people forget, Linda replied. Over the next few days, more visitors came. Janet, the reporter, arrived with 3 of Thomas's scholarship recipients, who were thrilled to finally meet their anonymous benefactor. The young firefighters told Thomas how his support had changed their lives and how proud they were to serve the same community he had protected. The mayor came to present Thomas with a key to the city. The fire chief offered him a position as a training instructor, teaching new recruits about strategy and courage. Several families from the community came to thank him for the indirect role he'd played in training the firefighters who had helped them. But the most emotional visit came from an unexpected source. A woman in her 40s arrived with 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl. Captain Mitchell, the woman said, her voice shaking with emotion. I'm Carol Henderson. You saved my family 10 years ago. Thomas stared at her in shock. These were the people from the Maple Street fire, but the children he remembered as small kids were now nearly adults. You probably don't remember us, Carol continued, but we never forgot you. We tried to visit you in the hospital, but they said you weren't ready for visitors. Then we lost track of you, but we never stopped thinking about you. The teenage girl stepped forward. I'm studying to be a paramedic because of you, she said. You showed me what real courage looks like. One of the boys added, I'm joining the fire academy next year. I want to be like you. Thomas was overwhelmed. These weren't the small children he remembered, but strong, healthy young adults who were alive because of his sacrifice. Was it worth it? Carol asked Thomas directly. What you did for us, what you went through, was it worth it? Thomas looked around the room at all the faces. Linda, the Henderson family, the photos from his scholarship recipients that lined his bedside table. For the first time in 10 years, he answered with complete certainty. Yes, he said firmly. It was worth every bit of it. Linda watched from the corner of the room as Thomas finally began to see himself the way everyone else saw him. Not as a monster, but as a hero whose story was far from over. Within a month,